everyone. Thank you for joining us today for Ophea's Fall Safety Check-in, focusing on the Concussion Protocol. My name is Selena Churro, and I use she, her pronouns. I am a projects leader at Ophea, and I lead the Safety Standards Project, which is also known as the Ontario Physical Activity Safety Standards in Education, or OPAS. With me today are my colleagues Janine and Katie, who will be supporting the back end of the session and monitoring the chat box. Also with us today are Karen Trotter and Steve Sirocco, who are on Ophea's Safety and Injury Prevention Advisory Committee in support of the concussion protocol updates on OPAS, as well as our partner Stephanie Kell from Parachute and Jennifer Dawson from the Living Guideline for Pediatric Concussion. Ophea is grateful for Parachute Canada's ongoing partnership and expert review of the concussion protocol. Ophea also recognizes the Living Guideline for Pediatric Concussion for informing the direction, content, and activities outlined in the Return to Learn and Return to Physical Activity plans. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the land upon which I am presenting from, as well as where Ophea's work takes place on. I am a colonial settler from Treaty 381, otherwise known as the Niagara region, which is situated on treaty land. This land is steeped in the rich history of the First Nations, such as the Haudenosaunee, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Because of this treaty relationship, it is to be acknowledged that we are all treaty people with the responsibility to meaningfully and continually respect this territory. Ophea's work takes place on traditional Indigenous territories all across Ontario. We are grateful for the opportunity to meet and work on these territories and recognize the enduring presence of Indigenous peoples on this land. We are aware that our settler acknowledgement uses language which may differ from language used by Indigenous peoples. Our land acknowledgement seeks to recognize the Indigenous territories where our work happens, and in true spirit of truth and reconciliation, it strives to be more than words, just words. By learning, understanding, and acknowledging, we wish to pay respect to the rich Indigenous history in Ontario. I would also like to take a moment to present our guest speakers today. So we have four amazing presenters. We have Steve Sirocco. Steve has dedicated over 30 years in the education sector. He began his career with the Halton Catholic District School Board, where he served as an elementary school teacher and later became the health and physical education curriculum consultant. Steve then spent the remainder of his career at the Ministry of Education, working with the Safe and Healthy Schools branch, as well as the Curriculum Assessment and Student Success branch. Karen Trotter, she is a consultant for student health and well-being, grades K to 12 in the CEC Providence Board. Prior to assuming this role, she dedicated 15 years to teaching health and physical education at the elementary level. Karen serves as an executive member of OASFE and has been an active contributor to Ophea's Safety and Injury Prevention Advisory Committee, as well as an Ophea ambassador for many years. She has played a key role in the development and revision of numerous Ophea resources, participated in provincial initiatives that advance physical health education, and facilitated professional learning sessions across Ontario in both English and French. Committed to fostering wellness through active living, Karen strives to model a healthy lifestyle and to inspire others to do the same. Next, we have Jennifer Dawson, PhD, Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario Research Institute. Jennifer Dawson is the guideline developer for the Living Guideline for Pediatric Concussion and the lead for patient engagement for the Transcendent Concussion Research Program. She has contributed her expertise to national concussion initiatives, including serving on the advisory team for the NCCP Making Headway in Sport course and the expert review team for the second Canadian Guideline for Concussion in Sport by Parachute Canada. Beyond her research roles, Dr. Dawson is a passionate community builder and coach. She is the founder of a grassroots organization dedicated to promoting physical literacy and introducing children to non-competitive physical activity. Dr. Dawson's work emphasizes inclusion, collaboration with people with lived experience, and addressing concussion management across diverse populations, not just sport-related contexts. And lastly, Stephanie Kell, Director, Knowledge Translation Parachute. Stephanie has spent more than 15 years working in injury and trauma prevention. Within her role, Stephanie leads Parachute's initiatives to improve concussion prevention, recognition, and management across Canada, including the publication of the Canadian Guideline on Concussion in Sport. I'm very pleased to have four amazing presenters with us today to guide us through our session. So the purpose of today's session is to provide school board consultants, coordinators, school board safety contacts, and public health representatives to increase the understanding of the evidence and key updates to the concussion protocol, identify tools and resources that are available to support school board implementation, share current school board implementation plans, and provide an opportunity to ask questions and identify additional areas of support. It is important to note that the session is designed to provide valuable information and resources for a better understanding of safety in physical activity settings. For questions that are related specifically to situations involving concussions, any physical activity happening in classes, intramurals, recess, sports, trips, etc., we encourage you to submit those questions in writing to Ophea through our Ask Ophea online tool or directly through emailing us at safety@ophea.net, which my colleague will put in the chat box for everyone. This just allows Ophea to ensure consistent responses and track answers and provide information that aligns with the most up-to-date evidence-based guidelines. In addition, I'd like to just share our session content disclaimer. So the Ontario Physical Activity Safety Standards in Education represents the minimum standard for risk management practice for school boards in Ontario for curricular and intramural club physical activities and interschool sports. Please note that each school board is responsible for developing their own safety policy. Publicly funded school boards in Ontario may raise the standards if they wish, but they are strongly encouraged not to lower them. Ultimately, the primary responsibility for the safety of students rests within school boards and their employees. Therefore, we strongly recommend that teachers, coaches, intramural supervisors, school administrators check with their school board to ensure alignment with their policies. Since 2014, the concussion protocol has been identified by the Ministry of Education through PPM 158 as the minimum standards for risk management practices related to concussion for school boards. School boards may customize the components of the concussion protocol to meet their specific needs, keeping in mind that they can raise the minimum standards but cannot lower them. The return to school plan in the concussion protocol is intended to support students' individual and gradual return to learn and return to physical activity. It does not replace medical advice. To learn more, you can review the About section on OPAS and the concussion policies and procedures in return to school plan. I will now pass it over to our partners, Jennifer Dawson and Stephanie, to discuss what sparked the change in the concussion protocol.
Thanks so much, and hi, everyone. For the last 10 years, Parachute has been leading efforts to harmonize the approach to concussion across Canada. And within Ontario specifically, this has included working with Ophea over the years and with the Government of Ontario on their concussion awareness resources, codes of conduct, and protocol templates as part of the implementation of the Rowan's Law legislation. Our common goal is that every student and their families, no matter where they're located or what activities they participate in, have access to information about concussion that is consistent. Consistent information from their doctor, from their sport or recreation organization, and from their school. And we want to emphasize that schools are critically important in this process. They're a place where children and youth spend so much time, where you are meeting students where they are, and where you have a profound impact on their well-being and development. And so on this latest update to the concussion protocol for Ontario schools, Parachute was thrilled to collaborate with the Living Guideline team and Ophea to help equip Ontario schools with a current and science-driven approach to concussion, implemented through a trusted and credible source in Ophea. And I'll pass it on to Jenny to say more.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. I thought I would just give a little bit of background about the Living Guideline. The Living Guideline for Pediatric Concussion, or PedsConcussion.com, is a project led by CHIO in Ottawa and the University of Toronto. And it includes 45 experts from across North America who review and vote on updates to concussion protocols twice a year. These updates are based on new evidence from research studies and expert consensus on best practices for managing and preventing concussion. So how did we get here today? In 2023, the Living Guideline released an updated version of the return to sport and school protocols. that included new evidence on the importance of resuming safe activities and academic participation as early as possible as part of the recovery. This is a change from previous protocols that instructed people to rest if symptoms worsened and stay home from school until improved. These updates were also harmonized with the number of steps or stages and the timing of medical clearance to resume risky activities that were implemented via the 6th Consensus Statement on Concussion in Sport, which was also released in 2023. And working with Parachute, we're super excited that these updates are now also integrated nationally in the Coaching Association of Canada's materials and in Parachute's second guideline on concussion in sport and Rowan's Law update. We are pleased to have had this opportunity to continue these efforts and have these updates implemented in schools across the province via Ophea. And so I think at this point, I'll pass the mic back over to Selena so we can learn more about Ophea's role.
Thank you, Jenny and Stephanie. So before we dive into the details of the new 2025 concussion protocol, I want to acknowledge that many school boards are still implementing the 2020 version, and that's okay. We know the shift from the 2020 to the 2025 protocol will take time, and every board is in a different place in terms of policy cycles, priorities, and capacity. What's important to remember is that Ophea's role, we are here to support boards throughout this transition, both with the release of the updated protocol and through the implementation process. Ophea doesn't determine when a board updates its policies, but our job is to be here to make sure that the tools, resources, and guidance are ready and available when you are. So today is one of the first starts with this session and going over all of the new resources available. So to begin, the intent of the concussion protocol updates were to align with the current research, expert recommendations, and Rowan's Law legislation to prioritize student health and well-being within school setting and support school boards with implementation of the updates. I'll now pass it over to Karen and Steve to provide a summary of the concussion protocol updates.
Thanks, Selena. I'm just going to take the next few minutes to walk through some of the main changes to the actual stages of the return to learn and return to physical activity within Ophea's protocol. The first update is that the initial stage and stage 1 that was in the previous concussion protocol has been updated to and combined so they align and they're identical. So as you can see on the screen, there was previously an initial stage and a stage 1, which took the student through after diagnosed concussion into that stage. This is now identical. It's now called the activities of daily living and relative rest. And in alignment with the evidence, there's also an emphasis that students should return to school as early as 1 to 2 days after they have been diagnosed with a concussion, as Jennifer had mentioned in the research. And it's okay if they are not symptom-free when they return, as long as they can tolerate school activities. Okay, thanks. This is a fairly busy slide, and basically this slide shows on the left side the previous return to learn stages, and on the right side, the updated return to learn stages. As you can see, these slides in the new protocol, one of the biggest differences, and you can see, is that these have been simplified. Both for return to learn and return to physical activity, we've tried to streamline the stages, aligned with the stages in all the other documents that were previously mentioned. And that will help to reduce the amount of back and forth between the home and school, and helps to increase the focus on the activities of each stage of student recovery. It's important to note that the students are still required to tolerate the activities identified at each stage to progress to the next stage. So some students may need to spend more than 1 day at one or more of the stages as they go through. From a recovery perspective and in alignment with the evidence, One of the most important changes in the concussion protocol is that returning to school-type activities without a risk of head impact are not only safe in the early stages of recovery, but are also important for helping students get better faster. Another important note is that after a student has been diagnosed with a concussion, they're not required to receive medical clearance to return to the classroom learning environment or complete any of the return to learn stages. So on this slide is the return to physical activity. Similar to the return to learn, you can see the streamlining of stages. From a recovery perspective, again, and in alignment with the evidence, important change to the return to physical activity is that students can return to aerobic activities like walking and jogging without the risk of head impact. These are not only safe in the early stages of recovery, but also important to help students recover and get better faster. The updated stages emphasize the importance of avoiding activities with the possibility of inadvertent head impact before being medically cleared. And Karen will talk a little bit about the updates to medical clearance. This includes game-like activities in physical education class or scrimmages in interschool athletics. Students can return to full participation in physical education in stage 5 and full participation in interschool athletics in stage 6. I'm going to turn it over to Karen now to continue on with the changes.
Thanks, Steve. Hi, everyone. So on this slide, you can see the full outline of both the return to learn and the return to physical activity stages in the updated concussion protocol. There are just a few key updates that I would like to point out. First, you'll notice that there are 2 different times when a student can return to school, either after stage 1 or no later than after stage 2 of return to learn. Students no longer need to be completely symptom-free before coming back to school. In fact, it's totally fine if their symptoms increase just a little bit as they start doing some learning and physical activities again. That's part of the recovery process. The important thing is that during these early stages, students avoid any activity that could lead to a fall or a hit in the head, neck, or body. So things like contact sports or rough play are still off limits, but school activities with accommodations if necessary, and individual movement activities with a low risk of inadvertent head impact are definitely encouraged. When we look at the return to physical activity stages, you'll see that medical clearance happens after stage 3. By this point, students should be symptom-free, and once they've been cleared, they can begin to take part in activities that may include a risk of contact or head impact once again. So overall, this updated protocol gives schools and families a little more flexibility and reassurance. It supports a gradual, safe return that focuses on helping each student recover at their own pace while staying connected to their learning and their community. So what happens if students experience a return of symptoms during the first few stages of the protocol? Well, we've learned from recent research and best practices around concussion recovery that it's actually beneficial for students to start resuming safe activities while they're recovering, and they don't need to wait until every symptom has completely disappeared. It's also normal and okay for symptoms to get a little worse temporarily while students start doing more. What matters is that any increase in symptoms is mild and short-lived, meaning that after suspending the activity that seems to be causing the symptoms to worsen, those symptoms settle back down within about an hour. Therefore, what used to be the recommendation of resting at home until a student was asymptomatic is no longer considered helpful. In fact, too much rest can actually slow recovery or make symptoms worse. That being said, it's still very important that students avoid any activities with the risk of falling or hitting their head or body until they've fully recovered. You'll also notice that the language around symptom management has changed quite a bit. Instead of indicating that a student must return to the previous stage for at least 24 hours if symptoms return, the new guidance now indicates that it's common for symptoms to worsen slightly with activity and that it's acceptable, as long as the increase is mild and brief. So if symptoms worsen for longer than an hour or cannot be tolerated, the student should simply pause, take a break, adjust their activities before trying it again, maybe later on that day or even maybe the next day. They are no longer required to return to the previous stage. Okay. As previously mentioned, the timing of medical clearance has shifted from after stage 4 to after stage 3. This is to ensure students are being examined and cleared earlier in their recovery, which helps keep the process safe, structured, and well supervised. Let's take a look at what happens after medical clearance and how the final stages of return to physical activity work. So at this point, students will have received medical clearance from a doctor or nurse practitioner, which happens before moving on to stage 4. By the time they reach this stage, students should be completely symptom-free. Stage 4 marks the start of an important transition. It's when students begin their return to physical activity environments where there might be a risk of contact or impact to the body or head. So while they're still being monitored pretty closely, this is when activities like team practices or drills might start to be reintroduced. Stages 4, 5, and 6 are designed to give students the time and space they need to rebuild their physical and mental readiness. Each stage focuses on gradual reconditioning, helping them get used to movement, competition, and decision-making again in a safe way. It's also important that students spend a minimum of 1 full day at each stage. That gradual approach helps them regain confidence, build endurance and coordination, and make sure they're really ready before returning to full participation. The idea is that recovery doesn't stop once symptoms are gone. These final stages are about helping students feel strong, capable, and safe as they return to regular activity and competition. After medical clearance, a student's concussion-related symptoms shouldn't return. However, if by chance they do, students should return to stage 3 of the return to physical activity protocol and be reassessed by a medical doctor or nurse practitioner. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Selena.
Thank you so much, Karen and Steve, for guiding us through a high-level overview of the specific changes. I'm now going to pass it back over to Jenny to provide an update or provide some key takeaways from all of the specific changes that Steve and Karen just shared.
Thank you very much, Karen and Steve. So as you've seen, we've just gone through the finer details and the new materials, changes to stage numbers, and other nuances. I thought I'd take this time to take a few minutes to touch on the bigger picture, how these updates will change how we help students with concussion in schools. So as mentioned by both Karen and Steve, we now know that when supporting a student with a concussion, one of the most important things is that returning to school early in the recovery process is now known to actually be beneficial. We know that staying away from school for too long can actually slow recovery. Instead, the goal is to help students get back into the classroom as soon as they can tolerate that environment. This may mean starting with shorter days or built-in breaks into their schedule, or full days with accommodations. Some may be able to handle school as early as 1 to 2 days after a concussion. And then following up on what was just said about symptoms and when they return, it's also common for students to still have symptoms when they first return. And that mild worsening when they return to learning or light, safe physical activity is actually okay and expected. And so activities like walking, light jogging, non-contact participation in school life are safe. And from research, we now know these actually help students recover faster. And so the concept is these activities and the mild worsening of symptoms will not make their concussion worse. And some people did previously think that. And I always circle back to this. When implementing these changes, it's important to remember that while students are recovering, we still need to be vigilant about physical safety. So ensuring students avoid situations where they could fall, collide, or take another hit to the head, neck, or body until they no longer have symptoms and obtain that medical clearance for riskier activities. And another key part of the recovery is maintaining social connection. We now know that keeping life as normal as possible, talking with friends, being part of the school environment, supports both mental health and recovery. So my suggestion when looking at the big picture of these changes is to encourage your schools to focus on what the students can do. Encourage students to start with safe, manageable activities and build from there. And the hope is that that approach helps students regain confidence, maintain that essential connection, and ultimately, the science shows that this will help them recover more effectively. So at this point, I'll pass it back to Selena to talk about how you can implement these changes.
Thank you, Jennifer. I do want to just take a pause, and Stephanie, if there was anything additional that you would like to add.
Jenny provided an excellent summary, and just to emphasize, we're thinking about the whole student here, and I think you're all thinking about it in this way. So this piece about maintaining social identity, social connection, peer support is so important to young people. And it doesn't take long for people to start feeling isolation, increasing anxiety, and the potential for other harms to their mental and spiritual health. And so we understand that it's easier said than done in terms of maintaining the balance as we're returning students to school, but just emphasizing how critically important this is to their health, and that science is showing that this is really the direction that we need to head together.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Stephanie. Yeah. Thank you, Jenny. All right, Steve, was there anything you wanted to add? No. All right. I see folks are adding some questions in the chat box. Please do continue to add your questions, and we'll answer them at the end. So next, we would like to get a sense of where school boards are currently at in implementing the updated concussion protocol. So we want to hear from you. We'll be using Mentimeter to collect your feedback so we can have some collective insights from across the province in real time. So you can either take a moment here and scan the QR code, or I need to start presenting it, but I'll present it in a moment. You can scan the QR code here on the screen, or my colleague Janine will enter the link in the Zoom chat box where you can directly access the Mentimeter. So within this activity as well, we will focus on 3 key questions. So looking at what your school board's current plans are, who's involved to support the implementation, and some of the successes and challenges. So our first question is, what is your school board's current plan to implement the changes in concussion protocol? So think about what stage your board is currently at, whether you're in the early planning, reviewing policies, beginning implementation, or well underway. Yeah, thank you everyone for answering the first question. This just helps us understand, get a little snapshot of where all the boards are at within the implementation journey. I will note that we will keep this Mentimeter open for a week past this session, so that you can continue to populate your responses as well as review what others have provided. So to move us along, I'm sure we have enough time for questions. I'll bring us over to question 2. So question 2 is around understanding who is involved with this work. So who is involved with your school board's plan to implement the changes? So this could include departments or roles such as safe schools, student services, school administration, health and physical education, or community partners. So I'll give folks probably 2 minutes here to also add responses.
Also, Selena, if there's any school boards who have included students in this process.
Mm-hmm. Starting to see a variety of teams involved and individuals across different departments. I think a key thing too is the collaboration across the various departments to ensure a consistent and effective rollout. So question 3 was successes and challenges, but I broke it down into 2 so we can focus on one and the other. So we'll first start with the successes. So think about what worked well. What has your school board experienced so far or is anticipating? In the previous slide, most folks are still in the early planning stages. Maybe not many successes to think about at this moment, which is also okay. Policy and procedure review. easy transition with changes. That's nice to hear. All right, to continue to move things along, I'll go over to the final question on the Mentimeter. So focusing on the challenges. So what are some of the challenges your school board has experienced or is anticipating as you move forward with the implementation? So thinking about where additional clarity is needed, any resources, support that might be needed, friendly training, spirit of burden.
I just have a quick question actually for Ophea. I noticed the comment about the administrative burden of each small fall and head impact. Is there somewhere else, I guess, another webinar where you'll be going through identifying a concussion and those early next steps?
We don't have another webinar planned, but at the end of the session, we'll be talking about introducing potential policy clinic sessions. So if folks are able to stay tuned, and I maybe have Steve talk a little bit about these potential sessions that could, or series that could be offered. We can go into more detail. Being mindful of Steve, you want to chat now? I was going to move us along.
No. I was just going to just say it's a great question, Jennifer, and I think that's something that as we go through, some of these implementation questions are from my experience, are residual questions from just our concussion implementation throughout the province. So I think, this is the opportunity. If you have had challenges and there were struggles with some of the processes and things like that, put them down here. It kind of goes back to that first question around what do we do about parents who do not want to have their child seen by a doctor. Like this isn't a result of the changes. This is things that the individuals on the call have had experience with. So I think by doing this check-in, we have an opportunity to select through this process and others, and then Jennifer, as you mentioned, develop a process to support boards in some of these bigger questions that are coming up. So I think this is the place to put them. And I think this is a great avenue to start the dialogue around closing the gap on some of these questions. Some of them aren't easy to answer, but some of them are definitely an opportunity to have a discussion with school boards around how this is happening within their local context.
Thank you, Steve and Jennifer, and thank you everyone for participating in this Mentimeter activity. Like as Steve mentioned, your insights will help us better understand the realities across boards, and will also help Ophea guide and sort of our next steps and how we can help support boards as they transition to the 2025 concussion protocol. So as mentioned, I'll continue to keep the Mentimeter open for folks to see what other boards are experiencing, as well as to continue populating the Mentimeter. So I'll now pass it over to Karen and Steve to provide some recommendations on potential next steps for school boards.
Thanks, Lena. Okay, so now that we've looked at the updates to the protocol, let's talk a little bit about what this means at the school board level and how you can start the process of reviewing and updating your board's own concussion policies. In my mind, we can divide this process into a few stages. So who needs to be involved? Where are we now? Where do we need to go? And how are we going to get there? So first of all, who needs to be at this table? And I saw a bunch of different approaches and different people who are currently involved in your review process. So to begin, we need to think about maybe establishing a review committee. So you'll want to form a multidisciplinary team that includes a variety of perspectives: system leaders, consultants, school administrators, educators, coaches, and as Steve mentioned, possibly even some students. It's also a great idea to have representation from both elementary and secondary panels, since the processes, logistics, and communication can look a lot different in each context. Once that team is formed, think about what learning or background knowledge each member might need to fully understand the new expectations, whether that's reviewing the updated protocol, learning about the latest research, or exploring Ophea's concussion resources. Then we need to decide where we are right now. So the next step is to review your current board policy and the requirements of PPM 158. So take time to identify what's already working really well with your policy. What are its strengths? And identify where there may be gaps or areas that need clarification or revision. This review process really sets the foundation for meaningful updates. Now, where do we need to go? So once you've done that initial review, the next step is probably to consult Ophea's revived concussion protocol. It aligns directly with PPM 158 and provides updated resources, templates, and best practices that can guide your revisions. And Selena will take you through those in a few short minutes. Before making any changes to your board's concussion policy, make sure those changes align with other related school board policies. For example, student health and safety policies, student mental health and well-being policies, or any other policies or procedures that might impact your board's concussion policy. Then you're ready to revise and update your concussion policy as needed. That might include refreshing the definitions, responsibilities, procedures, or forms to reflect the new guidance. If it's any consolation to all of you, I've been involved in this review concussion process, updated concussion protocol for a couple years now, and our board is still at that beginning review process. But when I looked at what really needs to be revised, there really isn't that much that needs to be changed. So it might seem like an important task and a big task, but I think once you get into the nitty-gritty of it, you'll see that it's really not all that bad. Okay, so finally, how are we going to get there? So we need to think about implementation and rollout. So what will this look like across your system? What funding support might be available? Who will act as the school level leads to support this work? So we need to develop a training and communication plan that will cover who needs to be trained, what information do they need, what do they need to know, where, when, and how training is going to happen, and how information will be shared and reinforced. So you might also consider developing communication tools or revising communication tools that you've already have in place for parents, students, and any other groups that are concerned. So things like updates to parent information guides, updates on your school board and school websites, messages sent to parents through school messenger, or maybe even some short information sessions at the school level. So overall, this process is really about collaboration, alignment, and clear communication. By bringing the right people together, reviewing where things stand, and planning thoughtfully next steps, your school board can ensure that their concussion policies are up to date, consistent, and supportive of all students' recovery and well-being. And hopefully that gives you a couple ideas of how to go about this process. And with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Selena.
Thank you so much, Karen. So, as mentioned at the start, Ophea's role is to support boards through this transition, both with the release of the updated protocol through the implementation process. So our job is to make sure that the tools, resources, guidance are ready and available when your board is. On the OPAS website under concussions, the concussion protocol sample tools have been updated, or we have also developed some new sample tools such as the suspected concussion, parents' guardian information, return to learn, return to physical activity stages, return to school plan parents' guardians information, and sample concussion symptom awareness tool. Ophea is also in the process of developing return to learn and return to physical activity visuals and is currently reviewing the Learning About Concussions teacher guide and lessons, which will be added to ophea.net along with the Ministry of Education's virtual learning environment. In addition, we have also updated the concussion awareness resources, Rowan's Law, concussion safety, and Ophea's Rowan's Law Day Toolkit for schools, as well as Ophea's concussion prevention, identification, and management for schools e-learning module. Ophea's e-learning modules are free to access with the free ophea.net account and are available school year round.
Sorry, just on the previous slide, the concussion safety, the Government of Ontario e-learning booklets, those are Parachute updated those. So just want to make sure we're not taking credit for things we didn't do.
Absolutely. Thank you, Steve. And lastly, as mentioned, Parachute Canada's booklets as well. Parachute Canada and PedsConcussion have many resources that are available for you to access as well. So please, we recommend and encourage everyone to visit our partners' websites to see what they have available there. So now we are moving into our thoughts and questions. So I see we do have a few questions in the chat box. Let me just open up the Q&A feature as well too to make sure I'm not missing anything. Oh, awesome. So they're all in the chat box. So we'll start off with Chantel. Just one moment here. What do we do about parents who do not want to have their child seen by a doctor when a concussion is suspected? So maybe Jenny or Stephanie, if you want to respond, if you have a response for Chantel.
Sure. I think that question may be a little bit out of the scope because this presentation has to do with that next step of after the child has been diagnosed. However, it's a very, very important question and one that your schools will have to have a protocol for. Steph can talk about Rowan's Law and the requirement for if a concussion is suspected, we need to make sure the child is seen by a doctor or a nurse practitioner before they return to any environment where they could hit their head. Steph, did you want to chime in with the work you just finished with the provincial government?
Sure. Thanks, Jenny. I mean, my starting point for this question would be understanding a bit of the why. I think that we can make a lot of assumptions when we get a bit of pushback. Sometimes it's okay, they don't want to do this or they're too busy. But as you know, there's reasons behind people's behaviors or people's responses and reactions. So could it be concern about accessing medical care? And we all know there's challenges accessing healthcare right now. Is it access to transportation or other barriers, social and economic barriers that the family could be facing? So I think the first step is understanding where the pushback is coming from. And that will help you understand where to meet this person and what kind of solutions could come in place. If it is a sense of this doesn't really matter, this doesn't make sense to me, or in the moment, just clear pushback. Certainly there's conversations to be had about emphasizing health and safety that we hope everyone responds to. But you may know that family has other priorities that speak to them. Are they particularly passionate about their child's academic performance? And a conversation could be had about how critically this injury could impact that for the student, their ability to complete assignments and make grades and participate. Are they particularly passionate, they and their child, about their sport and recreation activities? So I think there's lots of ways into the conversation. To Jenny's point, as a last resort, we can invoke the fact that this is a legal requirement. So your school is following the law in Ontario. These are required processes. So I think it's not a one and done answer. It's going to depend on the situation and what that conversation looks like, which people in schools deal with all the time. I think the question is going to be, what if there's still pushback about that initial assessment and nothing is getting through? That's going to be a question about how exactly the policy is applied. And one thing we want to think about is not using that to keep children entirely out of school. So how do we manage this while still allowing children some return to school? So there's a bit of gray navigation. And again, not a black and white answer here, but these are some of the things that we can think about in those scenarios.
Thank you both, Jenny and Stephanie. Before I go over on to the next question, Karen or Steve, do you have anything to add? Steve?
I think that was great.
All right. The second question, maybe Steve, you keep yourself unmuted. If you could maybe start off with responding. What is the reason why school boards are responsible for creating their own protocols? If these are the guidelines we must follow, has there been any talks to have the protocol form standardized for all Ontario school boards to use?
Yeah, so this is really a question that is out of the scope of Ophea's decision making. This is a PPM that existed before a lot of the resources and content were available. And it's updated in terms of Ophea. And as was mentioned throughout this presentation, Ophea providing the safety standard minimum for specific elements. The PPM goes into, and the requirement of school board policy goes far beyond just the steps and stages of return to learn, return to physical activity. It talks about the dissemination of information, the engagement of specific community partners, things like that, in which school boards have very specific both needs and requirements. So for a school board to adopt the stages of return to learn, return to physical activity, that I think has always been one of the pieces that school boards have done. In terms of the very seldomly do they adapt that, but it is around the processes, roles and responsibilities of staff, depending on collective agreements can be different between school boards across the province, who can do what. The professional learning, which is a requirement, school boards have different ways based on geography and resources that they provide that. So when you look at the requirements of the PPM more holistically, there's a lot of pieces that go beyond just the individual return to learn, return to physical activity stages and the tools that go with them. The other thing is that the tools and resources, as we've seen, there's a lot of organizations and people who have some fantastic tools and resources, including Parachute and PedsConcussion. And school boards aren't limited to those. So, if school boards want to do their own thing, it's one of those things that we allow for that, or the PPM allows for that, for school boards to do those types of things. What the PPM does direct school boards to is that Ophea's resources around safety are the minimum within that. So they do acknowledge that within the PPM. But when you go through the listings of requirements for school boards, it goes far beyond just that as being the requirement. So I would say, number one, Ophea can't change that as a reality. That's a Ministry of Education responsibility in terms of the PPM and its requirements, but also that it does allow school boards to take into account the specific needs of their communities and their partners. I would say that's my best answer for that.
Thank you, Steve. I am being mindful of time, so I know we have a few additional questions in the chat box, which I can quickly answer, but as mentioned, we'll follow up with an email to all respondents if we weren't able to answer. But the one question around age range, so these were developed for students only, and school boards will be responsible for developing policies for staff. I know Parachute does have some amazing resources for many target audiences as well too. So you can explore Parachute's resources. I don't know about PedsConcussion, but there's lots of, the OPAS standards are just for students. As well as the timeline question, Ophea isn't the one in charge of determining the timeline for when your board updates their policies. That's something that Ophea does not monitor and also out of our scope. So we'll continue to go through all the questions in the chat box and provide responses in our follow-up email. Just to move on to our next slide, I just want to, before I wrap up and before everyone leaves, I would just like to introduce, as mentioned, that potential idea of these policy clinics. So participating in paid series of concussion policy sessions designed to support school board compliance with policy requirements and to support school boards with policy review and implementation of concussion protocol and procedures. So if your school board is interested in participating in these types of sessions to be able to have that more one-on-one support, to be able to go into further detail, please complete the post-session survey, which can be accessed via the QR code here, or Janine will enter the link to the survey in the chat box, as well as in our email. So all the links today in today's session, including the survey and a recording of this session, will be made available shortly and will be sent directly to the email you used to register for this session. So thank you everyone again for joining us and learning with us today. And thank you so much for our presenters, Steve, Karen, Stephanie, and Jennifer. And one little final note, we know that planning and implementing safe and physical activity programs can be complex and challenging. And the OPAS website provides up-to-date information to support the planning and implementation of safe practices. To stay current, please always don't hesitate to connect with the safety team at safety@ophea.net. You can stay connected through Ophea's resources, professional learning opportunities, through all of our social media channels and e-connection newsletter. Always submit questions through the Ask Ophea, as well as if you're interested in any safety consultation or workshop, you can always email professionallearning@ophea.net. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time today. If you have any additional questions, please email us and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Thank you, everyone. Take care.